Welcome to the Realtor Party post-election live webcast. I'm Bill Brown, your 2017 NAR president.
And I'm Tom Salamone, your immediate past president. Thank you for joining us. The work we do as professionals and as an organization is noble, good, and lasting. Election Day was our opportunity to exemplify this point by electing legislative leaders and voting on important issues all across the country.
Our involvement in federal, state, and local races that impact the real estate industry is one of the reasons the Realtor Party has been so busy this election season. At the federal level, we were involved in 426 House races and 32 Senate races. In addition, we are involved in 47 opportunity races in which we support candidates by sending direct mail and online communications to our members. As a matter of fact, our PAC, the Realtors Political Action Committee, spent $25 million on congressional elections this year, the most in our PAC's history.
On the state and local level, we supported Realtor champions in 412 races this year. That's an increase of 36 races from the last presidential election cycle. Nearly 100 of these Realtor champions are Realtors themselves. In addition to our candidate campaign, we also had 18 ballot initiatives in 8 states. These campaigns run the gamut from fighting sales tax on real estate services, rent control, affordable housing, property tax, and transportation. Our state and local issue and candidate campaign activity spending totaled more than $17 million this year.
With all that activity, it's clear the Realtor Party uses every resource available to advance policies and candidates that promote homeownership and a vibrant business environment. Be sure to visit www.realtoractioncenter.com/elections to see campaign results in your state. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Tom, and welcome to the 2016 Realtor Party post-election live webcast, in which we look at what the election results mean to you and your business as Realtors. I'm your host, Stephen Gasquet, and joining me is Jerry Giovaniello, NAR's Senior Vice President of Government Affairs. Jerry, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Glad you're here. And also Doug Sosnik, NAR's political consultant. Doug, how are you today?
Great, thanks.
Glad you're here. We'd also like to thank you for being here, especially after a very long night all across America, because you will be part of this discussion also. Here's how. In just a few minutes, you'll have the chance to ask questions. To submit your question, just click on the email questions button at the top of your screen. Also, I hope you've been able to take time to visit the Realtor Party Campaign Coverage 2016 website for expert analysis and campaign profiles, as well as state-by-state election results. That web address is www.realtoractioncenter.com/elections. So let's dive right in. Jerry, the 2016 elections was like no other we have ever seen. So starting at the federal level, what was the impact of the election on real estate and our Realtor members?
Yeah, I think in a word, it was a great night for us. As you just heard Bill and Tom talk about our federal RPAC and Realtor Party efforts, they're all aimed at state and local and federal candidates. So I think, yesterday morning when you awakened, the Republicans controlled the House, the Republicans controlled the Senate. This morning, the Republicans control the House and they control the Senate. So there wasn't a lot of change, and more importantly for us is our motto here has always been, make your friends before you need them. So the people we're going to deal with in this new Congress are our old friends in many cases, many of the same committee chair people that we've been dealing with and telling them how important flood insurance is, tax reform are issues, and the reinvention of Fannie and Freddie. I think they've already heard for us. So I think all in all, good night.
Excellent, Jerry. Thank you. Now, of course, while presidential and federal elections dominated the media coverage over the last year, there were some equally captivating state and local elections too, from gubernatorial and mayoral elections to city and county council, school boards, and major ballot initiatives. The American public spoke loudly last night with their votes. So, Doug, were there any elections at the state or local levels that impacted the real estate industry and our Realtor members?
Well, we also had a good night. I think there are three races in particular that I wanted to just point out. One was Governor Herbert in Utah, who's not only been a friend of realtors, but in fact was a realtor, and he was in a very tough primary. And we worked with the Utah Realtors Association on an independent expenditure program, and he was able to get the nomination and get reelected. We also supported a Republican in Vermont, Phil Scott, who became the governor, which is unusual to see a Republican win, and we were very active in that campaign. And the third initiative, which I think was very important, was in Missouri, where the National Association worked with the Missouri realtors to get a constitutional amendment that passed with 57% of the vote to put a ban on services for sales tax. So that was really a terrific win for us with the leadership of the Missouri realtors.
Well, gentlemen, thank you. We have a lot more to talk about, but first, it's time for your questions. Remember, you can ask a question by clicking on the email questions button at the top of your screen. Okay, we have a question coming in now, and this is for Doug. Rent control ballot initiatives in California. Now, looking at the rest of the country, do you see rent control becoming a big issue in more cities and states?
Well, I think it definitely has the potential to, and I think in cities and states in which you're seeing rent prices get very high, you're more likely to see it become an issue. And also, I think in these communities, if you have Democratic activists, elected officials at the local level, I think the combination of rising rents with Democratic officials, you're more likely in the future to see these initiatives.
I see. Now, Jerry, of course, yesterday was your version of the World Series. How did your team do?
I thought we did really very, very well. Essentially, many associations in Washington do not involve their members in making decisions as to who they support. We're just the opposite. It's our grassroots who get involved in interviewing candidates and send them up to federal support. So essentially, we won over 90% of the races that RPAC was involved in yesterday. And of course, members of Congress know that, and they talk to each other in the hallways. But I wanted to point out something that we do that is highly regulated. These are our federal independent expenditures. We won 5 of the 7 in yesterday's races. They were all very tough and very close. And that's important because we return members of Congress, for the most part, with these independent expenditures. And I just, off the top of my head, I think we've done 8 in the Senate in the last 2 years. And senators, I hope, have good memories on how we do this and everything. One I wanted to highlight was we rarely do independent expenditures against a sitting member of Congress. This year we did do one of those, and it was in New Jersey, and it was against the Financial Services Committee subcommittee chairman, which is also very rare to do that. But we won. And I think that was an important message that Congress already knows about, and it was exceptional for us to do it. The fact that Congress knows we are willing to do that, and we'll see where we go from there. But good
Jerry,
win.
One more for you, Jerry. Tax reform. Now, we're going to have a completely Republican federal level at this point, with Congress and the White House all Republican. Now, I know that tax reform is talked about on both sides of the aisle, but with the new team that's coming up to Capitol Hill and into the White House, are things like the mortgage interest deduction, the property tax deduction, and the capital gains exemption at risk?
Yes, they are at risk because there have been many think tank studies pointing out how you reform the tax code or simplify them. These are all euphemisms for going after a lot of our incentives for home ownership and real estate investment. And we have to be very vigilant as to what's going to happen in 2017 because those are on the table, and we've already talked to some of the authors of these proposals. None of bills yet, but that's what we have to watch for.
Thanks, Jerry. And you know, when you talk about tax reform, you usually think about the federal government. But, Doug, I understand there are also tax reform initiatives at the state and local levels too. Can you tell us about those?
Well, I think we're particularly going to be vulnerable in the future, as in the 2018 governor's elections. There'll be 38 of them around the country, and over half of these races are going to be open seats. So as I think Jerry pointed out earlier, which I couldn't agree with more, you want to make your friends before you need them. Yeah. And so we're getting ready to have an enormously large and impactful class of new governors in 2 years. And so we really need to get in early now before the campaigns start and try to engage these candidates about what policies they're going to pursue as governors. And when you get a large group of newly elected governors, which is what we're going to get after the next election, because we're now in cycle, we will be very vulnerable within a couple of years for new governors starting their first term.
Thanks very much, Doug. Now the questions are still coming in from you, and remember, you can ask a question. Just click the button at the top of your screen. Now here we go. This is about the presidential election yesterday, and this is a two-part question. Let's start with this part of it. Since Donald Trump presumably, in quotes, has a good grasp of real estate, what will that mean to our profession, even though he is not a member of NAR?
That's a good question. I think all along we've said he obviously knows real estate and development and so on. I guess the president, working with the tax writing committees, certainly will have input and an opinion about his successes and shortcomings on some of the deals. And I think that'll be valuable input. I think that's the good part. The bad part is not bad, but essentially we're highlighted. This is an issue that both sides of Congress might feel, well, he knows the tax code best. He's been using it successfully and so on. So they might see that as an opportunity to move ahead very quickly.
One more question for you there, Jerry. With the President Trump and the Republican Senate and the Republican House, everyone's Republican. Is gridlock going to be a thing of the past?
I don't think so, for this reason, that I think the American people voted for change yesterday. And I think either party that doesn't embrace that is going to be in bad shape starting right now, as a matter of fact. So I think there will be some compromises. As I say, Mr. Trump has been a deal maker all his life. I don't think there'll be any of this resistance the way it's been. So I think I'm more optimistic. I'm particularly optimistic on our issues because we do have to do something about Fannie and Freddie and flood insurance next year.
Busy year coming up.
Very busy.
Doug, NAR, of course, is an advocacy organization. What should we be doing to proactively deal with issues facing the real estate industry?
Well, I think we have to identify both our vulnerabilities that could happen if legislators decide to try to target our industry, but also opportunities like we just were able to successfully do in Missouri to preemptively prohibit sales tax. So I think the first and most important thing we need to identify are what are our policy opportunities and vulnerabilities. And then the second thing I think we need to do as soon as possible is engage our members as much as possible directly with our elected officials to try to position ourselves to either take advantage of these opportunities or to prevent something bad from happening to our industry.
Question for Jerry. As we say here at NAR, under all is the land. And this questioner asks, what impact will this election's result have on land real estate specifically?
I think we've always been dealing with this issue either through water issues or environmental kind of provisions on this. I think it remains to be seen exactly the impact because certainly they're going to be priorities of the majority party, whether they be immigration, tax reform, building a wall, or trade, or whatever. So I think this is one of those subjects that we've always had on our radar screen, and we watch it closely. I think what we need to watch is, will this be a high priority of the administration?
I see. Thank you, Jerry. Now, Doug, does this election change how we should approach local races? And if so, what opportunities exist out there?
Well, I think this election should reinforce to everyone, and as Jerry mentioned a minute ago, that this was a change election. And the fact is, out of the last 6 election cycles we've had, 5 of them, the voters have voted for change. And so I think that we have to be very sensitive to the fact that we are now essentially in a permanent campaign environment. And I think it's going to be essential for us as an organization to continue to build in a systematic way our grassroots capacity. There's no organization in the United States, and I can tell you this as someone who used to work on campaigns, there's no organization in the United States that has the capacity to be more impactful than realtors, because we have our realtors in every community. Our realtors are leaders in their community. And so I think it's going to be essential that we engage our realtors as much as possible with our local officials in a permanent campaign style.
Very good. You know, Bill Brown, who just did the introduction to this webcast, one of his passions is the 1031 like-kind exchange, in which if you own an investment property in real estate, you can sell it, and whatever profit you get from that sale is tax-free. The tax is deferred, and you can plow the entire profit into your next investment. That's in the crosshairs. Jerry, is that in trouble next year?
It is in trouble because for the last few years, both the administration and some members of Congress has said we have to limit these kinds of tax deferrals. And it's not only property as such, real estate property. Many car rental companies use this, so it's much broader than I think even Congress realizes. Yes, this is in the crosshairs because both of the proposals on both sides have been to limit them somehow. And the belief is that if you limit them, the same number of transactions will happen anyway. That's just not the case, and we have plenty of research to prove that.
Of course, there's a Realtor Association representing every single neighborhood in the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. So now, Doug, tell us about the Realtor Party in those areas. How strong is the party, and what does it do?
Well, we can't be too strong or strong enough, and I think the goal of the Realtor Party is to try to coordinate at both the national, local, and state level our activities, and we are able to provide now at the national level a large number of resources that our local and state affiliates can use towards pursuing what they decide to be important for their members. And so to the extent that we're able to leverage our scale at the national level and allow and enable our people at the local level as far away as Alaska or Hawaii, who know their communities better than we do, to take advantage of the services that we have to offer them to help them deal with issues that they perceive to be most important for them, that is a great partnership in the way that we should be continuing to build to the future. And that is the goal of the Realtor Party, which is to leverage our assets and resources at the national level into these local communities.
Thank you, Doug. Anyone who's been at NAR for a while knows that even though NAR is involved at the local, state, and federal levels with candidates, it's hands-off when it comes to the presidential election. Jerry, why is that?
I think that's been our policy. I think it's a wise policy to begin with. Probably several reasons. One, the amount of money that is spent in presidential elections dwarf any one organization really getting involved and being effective. So I think that's a smart move on our part. The second part is what I alluded to earlier, that most of our business is done at the Senate and the House of Representatives, where we can have an impact. I mentioned the independent expenditure races, but the third reason is I think that our grassroots make us the most effective association here in DC. And when you mention that we're everywhere, members of Congress use that as a resource, that our realtors stay in the community, they know what's happening, they're there. Members of Congress immediately recognize this as a resource, and I think we've been wise to start it at the bottom, so to speak, and bring all of our issues first up through grassroots. And as Doug mentioned, we got to keep that part of it strong. So I think it's wise to stay out of the big elections, to be honest.
Now, come January, of course, you'll have a lot of new members up on Capitol Hill. Jerry, what do you do? Do you go talk to them personally? Do you educate them?
Educate is probably the best word, because most members of Congress have about a nanosecond of attention. So, you got to be really in there and talk about what the issues are. Also, the many new members of Congress, some of whom did not come up through any kind of public service, so they've not been exposed to realtor issues or our realtors for that matter. So I think we have a great grassroots team. Our realtors get to be their federal contacts, and our policy people get to know their staffs, the lobbyists get to know them, and it's a matter of, again, making your friends before you need them. But over the last, I would say, 10 or 15 years, lobbying has changed for our issues because many of the new members come with, I wouldn't say two strikes against our issues, but we have to explain the historical role of federal incentives, be that mortgage interest deduction, that's been around 100 years, and remind them that we, the American people, have made a compact about keeping communities strong, which might involve some federal programs, and keeping real estate investment strong. So it's kind of a 101 education sometimes with the new members particularly.
Great, Jerry, thank you. Now a question now about newer members of NAR. Tell us about the Realtor Party. What is it, how do we join, and what impact does it have? Doug.
Well, it's had a tremendous impact, as we just highlighted from this past election at the federal and state level. And as I said earlier, the National Realtor Party is our national umbrella from which our state and local affiliates, through their membership at the association, are able to join and take advantage of the myriad of benefits that we have at the political level. And we aren't Democrats, we aren't Republicans, we're focused entirely on realtors and realtor issues and how it affects the industry. And I can say, as someone who's, as I mentioned earlier, has been involved in the political process on the other end, there's not been in my lifetime a more effective organization and association. And I think our challenge is to, in a rapidly changing world, is to continue to stay ahead of the other groups and organizations in terms of how we are operating. And increasingly, it's more and more important that at the national level that we rely on our local members to lobby out in the states for our federal and state officials.
Now here's a big one. A question from a viewer. Reducing regulations was a major platform for President-elect Trump. Do you anticipate any major changes to Dodd-Frank?
Yes, there have already been discussions about that for the last year, and there's a court case that's working its way up through appeal. And essentially, bottom line is, yes, there'll be much more of a deregulatory atmosphere in this town, and that goes for financial reform, Dodd-Frank, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, environmental regulations, and so on. And I think that there's been a good case made that many regulations add so much to the cost of an affordable home that it probably is time to take a good, tough look at that.
Another question about a Trump presidency. Now, as we know, this is a gentleman who certainly knows his tax deductions. And the question is, what does a Trump presidency mean for real estate, especially the MID, the mortgage interest deduction?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the Republican platform did mention it, that it's important and so on, but they weren't very specific, nor were Democrats actually on this. And you could understand that. Platforms sometimes, very rarely, are taken literally on this. But essentially, we're not exactly sure. While he's said at times he would support the mortgage interest deduction, it remains to be seen to what degree, what changes, and so on. But he does know the tax code as far as real estate is concerned. There's no two ways about that. He's used it very successfully. So.
Thanks, Jerry. One for Doug. Are there partisan trends we can expect to see at the state or local levels that directly impact real estate and our Realtor members?
Well, I think there's a possibility that as you see less regulation at the federal level, I think you have the potential to see more regulation at the state and local level, as I think disproportionately you're going to see cities being controlled by Democratic elected officials, and in some of the larger and mid-sized cities in this country, you're seeing very progressive policies in general, with more of an inclination towards the regulation at the state and local level that I think, as Jerry pointed out, you're probably going to see less of at the federal level. And so I think for members in communities in which you have progressive activist elected officials, I think you're likely to see more regulation at the state and local level.
Thanks, Doug. Another question. I am a realtor with many clients, and I expect that soon they will ask me what the election means to them. What does it mean, Jerry?
I think several things. One is through the tax code changes that either incentivize the purchase of a home or, on the other side, makes the ownership of a home and renting about the same as far as, and that's something we really have to watch for as practitioners of real estate. Another federal item we have to be careful about owning a home, strong communities, is flood insurance. It's $24 billion in debt. Each region of the country has a very tough and strong opinion of what it should do. For instance, Nevada has a very different view of, say, Florida on this issue, or Louisiana. This is going to be very tough to deal with. So for a potential homeowner, we are going to have to watch for them. You know, one of the best things about NAR is that what we're doing is supporting home ownership, real estate investment in strong communities. And for instance, that Mortgage Debt Forgiveness Act that we had passed, I think about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, essentially prohibiting IRS from the taxation of phantom income on a short sale or a foreclosure. When we got that passed, that wasn't for us, that was for consumers, essentially. And I think our way of looking at lots of legislation is, what does it do to the potential real estate investor, and what does it do to the potential real estate homeowner? So,
and you know, when a realtor's client asks that question, they might also remind them that no one's fighting for homeowners but NAR.
Exactly right, exactly right.
Now, looking at another issue, will NAR continue to stay involved, and this is what the writer says, in regard to EPA's overreach, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Power Act in the future?
Yes, I mean, we've been involved all along, either through court cases, with holding up the regulations, and now essentially they're still unresolved. Our policy and our strength on that has never changed at all.
Okay. One more question for Jerry, and then we'll move to Doug. Jerry, the writer says, why is it that Congress always considers the flood insurance bill just for a year, and then a year, and then a year? Why don't they do a big 10 or 15-year extension of it?
Right. We did a 5-year extension of it last year, and that's the way it should be. Very often, because of what I just mentioned, Nevada, Florida, Louisiana having different views on this, what happens is it's very hard to reach a consensus, and so the bill expires. The program expires, and then we need a short-term extension. Sometimes it's 3 months, 6 months. I think what we will be doing as soon as Congress comes back is ascertaining where the consensus might be and when. And why don't we just get a extension ready now and maybe even get it passed so that it's not every month we're losing pipeline transactions because there's no way to get the insurance done.
I see. Doug, let's talk taxes at the local and state level. Some states have transfer and recordation taxes. You sell a house, you're taxed. You buy a house, you're taxed. NAR has been watching those very closely to make sure that they don't become status quo in all the states in the United States. So was that addressed yesterday at all? And if so, how did we do?
Well, in Missouri, as I mentioned earlier, we went proactively. This is to go out and preemptively deal with something that didn't become a problem later by getting a constitutional amendment to put a ban on services with a sales tax. And I think that both in terms of your question and what Jerry's alluded to earlier, is increasingly at both the state and local and federal level, you're finding elected officials of both parties, perhaps for different reasons, looking to find new revenue sources. And that's when we can become vulnerable if they feel that we are a target of ways to get money for them to fund other programs that they want to, that they view as a priority. And so I think as money gets tighter, we become potentially more vulnerable, which is why it's so important for us to take advantage from the national level with the realtors and the Realtor Party all the way down to the state and local level to try to be as aggressive and preemptively as we can, as they did in Missouri, and as Jerry said earlier, which is we need to make our friends before we need them.
I love that quote. A big question that everyone in America is talking about today. And this questioner says, the pollsters missed the mark in this election. Does that change our approach going forward?
I know our pollsters missed the mark on president, but we didn't ask them to do that. As far as our independent expenditures, and we won 90% of our votes, I think they were very accurate, because essentially what they'll do for us is ascertain how close the race is for a member of Congress, but more importantly, they will test the issues that we will use in mailers and things like that that go over best in that particular congressional district.
Let's hold that up to the camera. That's awesome, Jerry. What are we looking at here?
Essentially, this is a mailer to realtors in a district in California. This one happens to be, but we always design it so that when the realtor gets it, he realizes that the member of Congress is working on these issues particularly, and they're tailored to that particular district. So I think our pollsters have helped us with that. So maybe they missed the big, bases loaded and 2 out home run, but as far as helping us, they've been very, very good.
A question for Doug. Now, of course, real estate is local, and we have realtor associations and realtors in every state in the United States. Is it ever possible that in one state there will be an initiative we oppose, and in another state in a completely different part of America, that initiative would be beneficial to realtors?
Well, I probably should defer to Jerry on that. He's got more experience than I do. But my instincts are that in general, I think realtor issues are more similar than dissimilar, and I think it would be unusual that you might find in a state over here that they would have a position that's diametrically opposite to realtors in another state nearby.
I see. A question for Jerry. How do we reach out to the Democrats as we go forward?
I think, in essence, we don't need to reach out to them. We've always used them. I think our strength has been a bipartisan approach to legislation, letters to the agencies, and I think that's still one of our strongest assets, along with our grassroots there. I think if we just did one party and relied on them, sooner or later you're going to get sold out, period. That may not be soon, it's mostly sooner or later that happens. So I think, I always say this when I speak to realtors, that essentially 2 groups hate that policy, bipartisan, in Washington. One are Democrats, the other are Republicans, and I think that's great.
A question about foreign investment. Of course, many markets in the United States are teeming because of foreign investors. They're coming in, they're buying retirement homes, second homes, investment properties. The question here, do you think the newly elected president will cause great fear to foreign real estate investors?
I think that's already being discussed in some of the blogs and newspaper reports, because he has very strong opinions on immigration and so on. So whether that leads to a chilling effect in the short term, because we don't know where immigration is going to be as far as priorities, but it's a good question and something we're going to have to be alert to.
And Doug, that result last night that was unanticipated, do we change our approaches because of that?
No, I think it only reinforces the importance of, as I mentioned earlier, the importance of us always staying in a permanent campaign, and the importance of staying as close as possible to what's going on out in the communities and being able to sense what's going on and to try to engage people based on where they are. And I think to some extent Democrats got, speaking as a Democrat, got caught short by not being really in touch with what the feelings were for a majority of Americans out there. And so not only did Democrats lose the election yesterday, but I think Democrats didn't even see it coming because they had lost touch with the majority of Americans. In many states, the Democrats have carried since 1992.
And how about you, Jerry? As we look at the election results last night, do you see any cause for a redirect in how you do your work?
No, quite frankly. I mean, as I said, our concentration has always been in worrying about 2017 as a potentially perfect storm where we have to face Fannie and Freddie reform, tax reform, and flood insurance. So again, I think we're going to concentrate on the members of Congress as to how we do that. And that means both sides. So I don't see an approach change.
So as you said, in the elections yesterday, your team did very well up on Capitol Hill in maintaining real estate as a priority across America. But looking ahead, Jerry, what would you consider to be the biggest long-term threat to NAR's ability to maintain that kind of electoral success?
Right. That's what keeps you awake at night question, Stephen. And I think it's two things. Look, we have 1.2 million members, huge diversity across our states, and even what our members do. Some are managers, some are commercial, others are residential. I think that diversity needs to be encouraged and protected in this sense. We really have to be vigilant against becoming a national association of balkanized realtors or states, because then you lose the ability to speak as one voice and 1.2 million people. And that is something that obviously Congress cares about. When I worked on the Hill for 2 members of Congress, the members of Congress are expert on slicing and dicing, and they don't like when one big organization comes in and we're united on it. I remember one time I worked for 2 Californians, and the California Medical Association had an issue on which was the opposite of the American Medical Association. Guess what we did? My member did. He went with the California Association, which completely kind of disrupted whatever the national mood was. So I think, again, we got to be an association that remains strong and focused.
Jerry, you said a little while ago that we might see changes to Dodd-Frank, and this questioner says, can Jerry give us some examples of the Dodd-Frank changes he anticipates?
There's been a discussion that Dodd-Frank's regulation are aimed at essentially local and regional lenders and banks. That's one issue. So there's been discussion and a movement to perhaps relax the regulations that apply to smaller lending institutions or financial institutions. So that will be a big push on that. They may get pushback from the American Bankers Association, who doesn't mind a lot of regulations, and for the most part, because it keeps the competition from moving up sometimes. So
I see.
That's a debate, but it's deregulation in general of the financial marketplace. The other part of it is that almost half of mortgage lending now is being done by non-bank banks, and there's some gray area as to whether they should be regulated, unregulated, their internet, they're this. So I think there'll be a debate about that also within the deregulation part of it.
I see. Now let's talk about buying a house for the first time. As we know at this point, Fannie and Freddie both offer mortgage products with a 3% down payment available. FHA is still at 3.5%. This questioner says, with the outcome of this election, do you see the government offering any kind of future down payment assistance for home buyers? Doug? Jerry?
No, go ahead.
You're far more qualified than I am.
You remember during the housing recession of 6, 7, 8 years ago, we were able to pass 4 times a tax credit for purchase of a home. Well, I don't see that because the market is very robust and is doing well. Home ownership rates are creeping back up. They're still not to where they historically were or should be, actually. I think the questioner might be talking about maybe we could do something on student loans, have them refinanced or something like that. That would be a help on something like that. Otherwise, I think the deregulation movement would probably mean something like, right in the platform of the Republican Party, for instance, they feel that FHA should be available for essentially first-time or lower-income borrowers. So there is a plank in there to essentially limit it to high-income, end it for high-income people using that program. So I think there's a mix there. But for a straight-out incentive, I don't see that. I think you could tweak these education loans particularly to perhaps help.
Thank you, Jerry. Last question for both of you gentlemen. You're walking down the street and a Realtor member comes up to you and says, in all, how did we do yesterday? Doug, what do you tell that Realtor member?
Well, from what I know firsthand at the state and local level and what I've heard Jerry talk about today, I would say that we had a very good day, but that we have to understand that the election's over, we have to face the future, and I know, as I mentioned earlier, at the state and local level, we're getting ready within the next election to have a real turnover at the entire country, at the state and local level, with a whole new sets of governors. And we need to get in there as soon as we can to identify people that we want to support, the policies that are important to us, and make sure that as we talk to these potential candidates that we're going to support, that we know where they are on our issues before that we support them. And then we should do everything possible to help them get elected. And when they get elected, we should do everything possible to have them help us protect home ownership in this country.
And Jerry, for you, the same person asked the same question. How did real estate and how did realtors do in yesterday's election?
I think the answer is we did very well. And I think our realtor on the street probably has a better picture of local, as Doug said, and probably knows his or her senator or member of Congress. But I think when you look at it in the totality of it, winning 90% of the races that RPAC was involved in is enormous. I just think it's terrific in a crazy kind of election year. And again, members of Congress know that. They will know it. We'll remind them of that, of course. And I think all in all, very good. But again, 217, we have to be prepared for a perfect storm on it. And I would ask that realtor in the street, you know, are you involved locally? Because that's the most important part of this thing. They've given us the resources. Look at this building we're in. It's a block from Congress. And we do have members of Congress sit right where I'm sitting. So,
right.
You know, they know what this is about. So I think those are the things that we won, and nothing to be dispirited about, to be honest.
And I love the fact that any member of Congress who walks out the door can look this way and see the great big Realtor R on the side of our building.
That wasn't an accident. Part of it.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Now, if you missed any part of the webcast, or if you'd like to see it again, we'll have a recording online later today at the Realtor Action Center at www.realtoractioncenter.com/elections. And as we said, that's also where you can go to find complete election results. We've learned a lot today, and the bottom line is NAR and the Realtor Party are working for you and your clients every day all across America, making sure everyone in government at the federal, state, and local levels know real estate is a top priority. And as we heard in 2016, we proudly continued that work for you, our Realtor members, your clients, and your communities. Jerry and Doug, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Good.
And on behalf of NAR and the Realtor Party, I'd like to thank you also. Great questions, and thanks for joining us today, especially if you didn't get a lot of sleep last night. Thanks for being here for the 2016 Realtor Party Post-Election Live Webcast. We hope to see you again soon.